Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webcast, guaranteeing Microsoft 365 service delivery when the SLA becomes an XLA. I'm your host, Nick Cavalancia, Microsoft MVP. I'm also joined today by Rob Doucette. Rob, if you would slide the slide forward for me, I appreciate it. I'm also by Rob Doucette. He is VP of Product Management over at Martello. Rob, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Nick. Happy to be here. Looking forward to today's content.
Glad you're here as well. Yes, so a couple of housekeeping items before we get started today. This presentation is being recorded, of course. You'll be sent a link to it afterwards, so don't worry about it in case you want to be able to share it off with a colleague or be able to look at it later in case you have to leave early, that sort of thing. We are taking questions in the Q&A box, so we'll certainly have some time at the end of today's webcast to address those. And then just a little bit about the format of today's webcast. Rather than it being you're probably used to, 58 slides in 22 minutes, one of those deals, just sort of the death by PowerPoint. This is far more a conversation between Rob and myself. I think we've got a total of 4 slides in addition to an agenda slide that I'm going to cover in a moment. So if you don't see the slides advancing, that's okay. Think of the slides as more a visual indicator of what we're talking about rather than being the focus of the presentation today. As you can see, the agenda here today is basically a little bit about what does it mean to have an XLA. It's an experience level agreement. We'll talk about what that actually is, why you should be thinking about that for Microsoft 365. How can you practically put in production a measurement and maintaining of an XLA in a Microsoft 365 environment. Rob's going to do a little bit of a live demo to kind of show you what Martello has to offer, and then offer up some next steps, and we'll do some Q&A. And so the place where we're going to kind of start our conversation today is if you take a look at the goal that you have, really when you think about Microsoft 365, on the next slide here, you'll see the goal that you have is service delivery. And so you're really thinking about when I have put Microsoft 365 in the environment, we're heavily reliant upon it. Basically, parts of your operations are living and producing and collaborating and doing all their work inside Microsoft 365. So in some ways, Microsoft 365 is your business. As you can see there, up last number we heard was around 115 million daily users, something along those lines. And so now it's really become more of a digital workspace for your organization rather than it just being like, oh, we use Exchange, that kind of thing. And so I listed some of the services you can see here in the slide here, like Wonder for Business, and Team, Exchange Online, and SharePoint Online, and the list kind of goes on and on from there, but those are the big ones there. And at the same time, even though this is purely a Microsoft technology, and we as technologists go, well, there's not much I can do about it, either they're up or they're down, right? You're aware of in the cloud, there's the shared responsibility model. And so in this case, it means even though it is cloud, and Microsoft is in control of most of it, the services, the infrastructure, the connectivity, availability, all that kind of stuff, there's that shared responsibility model where part of it is technically you're responsible for it. However, I think where that kind of emanates is the fact that the organization kind of still looks to you as the one saying, well, how come it's not up? What's going on? How come it's slow? And you're like, I don't know. And the idea is we think that you actually can know, and we're talking about that a little bit today. And so instead of, you see this sort of spectrum I've got towards the bottom of the slide deck here, it used to be just more or less on the left-hand side. Is it running? Is it operational? Is it up? And you, of course, can get that just with some basic. Microsoft has a Twitter feed that tells you what services are up or down and what's impacted, that kind of thing. That's great. You can tell, thumb up, thumb down. But the reality is your users have their expectations elevated, and they're really now more on the right side of the spectrum. Maybe on the far right, but it's more like, how well is it running? Am I having a good experience? Is it slow? Is it fast? Is it responsive? Am I getting the files done as quickly as I think I should? All that kind of stuff comes into play. And that's when we start talking about that X and experience level. And the reality is you have to kind of, if you think about whether a service level agreement actually does anything to aid in service delivery, the answer, of course, is no. It's just pretty much an up, down, generally speaking, or maybe some response time kind of definition. So if we flip to the next slide, you'll see that for most of you, if you're thinking about maybe an XLA and you're not familiar with one, there's this shift that's been going on in the industry. This is very forward thinking, by the way. There's not a million organizations and a trillion organizations doing this yet. This is more like those that are really trying to be mature in the way that they deliver Microsoft services. And when you think about the SLA from Microsoft's standpoint, it's been really purely uptime. I did a quick screenshot from their current SLA document, and you can see basically on the monthly, it's monthly uptime percentage. and they'll give you some money back if the monthly percentage goes below 99.9%, which is what they guarantee. All right, that's it. That's all it is. Are we up? Are we not? But we all know that there's a lot of nuance in that. I remember reading a stat. I don't have the source, but I remember it's more anecdotal at this point. But it was something like, if a web page takes more than 4 seconds to load, people go, forget it. They close the web browser and they just go to the next thing they're going to do. Right? It just takes too long. And that idea of the experience really kind of comes into play, and that's where an XLA, an experience level agreement, really has some merit here. And as you look at the bottom set of bullets I've got down here, an XLA really starts addressing more things than just uptime. You can see things like latency, which of course is more the technical definition of like, is it fast enough? Am I getting my files quick enough? Is the page refreshing quickly enough? All that kind of stuff. So it really is kind of addressing things like latency, because as we'll talk about a little bit today between Rob and myself, there are a lot of technical factors that come into play when you're thinking of even something like latency. If there's partial service outages, something like, let's say, just authentication for Microsoft 365, not even Exchange or SharePoint or Teams, those are fine. They're working just perfectly. Or maybe within Teams, which of course is underneath the hood, is about 5 or 6 different services, including Exchange and SharePoint and OneDrive and some other stuff. It could be that just one part of Teams isn't working, but Teams itself is fine. You can do collaboration, but you can't make calls or whatever it is. And then things like connectivity, what happens between the user and the service. There's a lot that happens in between, just that connectivity there. So looking beyond latency and being slow, but actually where you can't make the connection. And then there's more even than that. Rob, I've done enough talking. I really want to kind of bring you on a conversation here. So I've done a couple of questions here. The first one I'm thinking of is, what do you think has changed sort of in the industry that's caused the SLA to no longer be valid? Maybe a valid way to measure the organization's use of a cloud service like Microsoft 365 and really sort of needing to change to an XLA?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's you know, it wasn't that long ago when most of these services were managed by IT teams. The applications were hosted in data centers or branch offices, that sort of thing, and the users were very, very close to where the service was being delivered, and often on the same well-designed, reliable network. So availability was good enough at that time. But now, as you've started to articulate here, there's a lot between the service and the user now. The service is being hosted by Microsoft. The network that often used to be as I mentioned, a well-designed, high-reliant network that the user was on is the same as the service. That's now the internet. Now you have the user's endpoints. There's lots of things there that they need to get a better understanding of in terms of understanding, are my users being productive with this service, regardless if Microsoft is telling me that it's available or not.
Yeah, I like that. And also to add to that, it's also why are they not productive if they're not productive, which is another factor there.
Exactly.
So let's talk about this a little bit technically. So from a technical perspective, and you get as deep as you want, but what do you think is really being measured, or what have you experienced being measured by your customers when they're thinking about an SLA versus what would they be measuring when they're thinking about an XLA?
Yeah. So I mean, I think you said it well from the SLA perspective earlier. It's literally just been measuring uptime. Is the service running or not? Which doesn't necessarily tell you that your users are being productive, right? It's one thing to say, well, Microsoft is saying that Teams is got the green check mark beside it in the portal, but Nick's yelling at me that his Teams calls are have high latency, or the video frame rate's not there, or they're dropping. So, there's a lot of things beyond just Microsoft's perspective of how well that service is, running in the data center. But, what's the performance of the ISP? Is that traffic going through a VPN, through a cloud security broker? What's the Wi-Fi or the wired connection of the local user? There's kind of a lot of different aspects that come into play, even just performance of the endpoint itself that the user is using, right? Are there other applications or things on that endpoint that might be hogging resources that otherwise would be used by teams in order to have a decent experience?
Yeah, I would agree. I think of it this way. For those of you in the audience, if you're thinking about an SLA, I wish I had a visual for this, and I should have done this, and I apologize. So imagine you've got this sort of spectrum line, and I guess I got to stay here within the video here. And on one end, you've got the endpoint. On the other end, you've got Microsoft services, right? And with a Microsoft SLA, all they're basically saying is over here on the Microsoft services, is this up or is this down? And also, if it is slow, they probably have their own tolerances, right? They're not checking with you like, hey, do you think it's slow? No. It's if Microsoft thinks it's slow. And if they don't think it's slow, it's up. too bad, right? So, but then if you think about this connection, and Rob kind of touched on something, he just didn't put them in an order of like, think about the endpoint. First off, could be a personal device. Then they're on their own home Wi-Fi. Then are they connecting to a VPN to the office or not? Are they using maybe a secure access services edge or something like that, where they're trying to be given access to and directed to, in this case, whether it's corporate resources or they're going through the corporate network, and inside there are there other services that are scanning network packets and adding more latency, and it's routing through a bunch of different locations, and then finally it goes out to the internet through an ISP, and then it gets to Microsoft, and then it gets to the services. There's all those things that are in between. And if you think about it that way, the SLA is just that one end of the spectrum, and the XLA is measuring everything in between. And a lot of it is stuff that's on your side as well as Microsoft's side, but your side where you can actually do something about the problem here. So if we look at the next slide, we talk about why an Office 365 XLA is a better choice than an SLA. I've got four reasons up here. And then Rob, I want to kind of get some of your perspective as well. When you think about it, the SLA doesn't talk about quality of service. It has nothing to do with that. It's just purely, is it up? And again, Microsoft might have their own definition of whether it's, they have their own tolerances. They have to. And then they decide whether that's considered down or not. And then if you think about that spectrum that I just outlined, that second bullet I've got here, the Microsoft services are just one part of a much greater equation of what can be impacting a user's ability to have a good experience when interacting with Microsoft 365 services. The good news is the third bullet, that the user experience has an ability to be measured. We're going to show you some examples today and talk about it, and whether you're using Martello's technology or someone else, but the idea is that there is some capability today to measure the user experience and see whether or not the user is having a bad time, in some cases even proactively before the user themselves goes online. We can actually tell, oh, the people in the Paris office are having very slow connectivity to Office 365, and no one's even in the office yet. That's good. Then you can do something about it. You can notify people, start doing some troubleshooting, that kind of stuff, and we'll show you some of that. And then you can do something about some of the service quality issues. Even if it's Microsoft, it might be that you're limited to, I can notify people, but at least you did something. It's not like, oh, we didn't know, we'll look into it, and then the people are just frustrated. Instead, it's you've proactively notified them. That's something. It's not perfect, but it's something. And then you also can, if you know when, even if it's the Microsoft side, if you know that it's only one office that's impacted, but not everybody else, you can notify the entire company. Microsoft's having some issues. Currently, it's only impacting the Paris office. So you're doing that, but then anything else in between that, from your corporate network all the way back on that spectrum that I laid out to the end user's endpoint, you have some ability to make some changes on how they interact, how they connect, what network they're using, what services are in between them and Microsoft, and things like that. So you have some ability to make some changes there. So Rob, maybe we can talk a little bit about the complexity of just delivering the Microsoft service to an endpoint here. What end-to-end aspects of that interaction that I've sort of outlined between the endpoint and Microsoft 365 services are you seeing kind of in the field with customers that are really influencing the user experience most?
Yeah, and I think it extends from kind of the path that you just described, right? Anybody who has to troubleshoot that chain, it can be a nightmare without the right tools.
Yeah.
And most of the tools, are still a bit immature in terms of being able to paint that picture, right? Understanding, like you said, if you boil it down to, is it something with the user? Is it something with an internet service provider or maybe a SASE provider? Or is it the actual provider of the service, in this case, Microsoft? And, if you don't know that, all you have is a user yelling at you that something's not working and they're not being productive. There's a lot of troubleshooting that's involved to try and understand, okay, is it my ISP? Is it my cloud proxy? There's so many variables to try and get your arms around that you really need a different set of tools to be able to attack this, and especially trying to move away from being reactive to proactive, right? How can I get ahead of this so that I know about these problems before someone yells at me or creates a bunch of tickets in my support tool?
Yeah, I'd agree. With the SLA kind of mentality, if someone's go, hey, what's wrong? I don't know. I mean, that's really the answer, because all you're doing is relying on Microsoft to say it's up. And if it's not up, then you go, oh, well, it must be us. And instead, we're really talking about monitoring the entire experience so that those of you in the audience, you're really thinking about making sure that everything that's involved along the way is up and running. So Rob, I'm thinking sort of, an SLA, of course, is completely dependent on Microsoft. There's not much we can do about that. But with an XLA, there are remediation, response steps, that kind of thing that our audience can take in general. What are some of the ways that you've seen customers respond to an issue or take action when an issue arises?
Yeah, and I think it often starts with the Microsoft SLA, right? The very first thing we do, okay, is the thing on? Okay, yep, Microsoft has set this thing on. Now let's kind of move our way down the stack, if we will, from global, regional, down to local issues. And they'll start with the Microsoft view, then they'll kind of progress down to, okay, is there any issues with this ISP? Maybe there are other users that are complaining, or maybe that ISP has a similar page that publishes that their thing is on. And then moving to the user, and especially in the environment today, a lot of us are working on less reliable networks than maybe we were a year or so ago. So there's a lot of stuff on the user side, and we hear things like faulty headsets, that might not be providing a good experience for the Teams call. So it's actually nothing to do with the network connectivity, but actually the headset is a problem. And so having that visibility is really important. Or they're on a Wi-Fi network at home that maybe they don't have great coverage, or there's congestion on the network. And so there's a lot of things that if you don't really know, it's very easy to blame Microsoft first and foremost, right? Their name is on the product. Okay, it must be something with Microsoft. The reality is that Microsoft does a pretty good job of keeping the service running pretty much all the time. But again, as we've already sort of said in the beginning of this presentation, there's a lot of stuff in between the user and the Microsoft that comes into play. And being able to quickly identify, okay, it's not Microsoft, it's not my ISP, okay, it must be something with the user, and then drilling into specific cases. Okay, let's better understand, what the user's doing, where are they, what sort of network are they on, what is the experience they're getting with these calls, to try and piece together what's going on.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that. On the next slide, I've got a couple of bullets for those in the audience about practically measuring and maintaining XLA. And a lot of this has to do with some technology that you may not have in place today, which I'll talk about at the bottom of the slide here. But as Rob and I are painting this picture of what's possible and also what's necessary in order to be able to establish and then maintain an XLA. The XLA itself, of course, once you have a handle on when services are up and how quickly you can respond, you decide whether it's going to be more about having a certain quality of experience or a certain response time to ensure experience, or however your organization wants to implement it. There are aspects of the connection between that one end of the spectrum and the other that are going to kind of come into play here. And so you see in the bullets there, the sort of sub-bullets there of the first one here, where you have end-to-end visibility. It means you're watching the endpoints. You may have to have an ability to see every endpoint in some cases, or at least a network that represents a group of endpoints, like an office, or maybe a particular method of connectivity. Like, for example, if you're in, let's say you have a bunch of users that are still not working from home, but they're working in the office, and a group of them are on Wi-Fi. Maybe you're trying to watch something that represents all the users on Wi-Fi, as well as all the users that are wired in at the office, things like that. You have location, office, and networks. Now you're thinking a little bit more global. Okay, each individual office, each individual location. In theory, users at home, not as easy to do, but is possible. But that kind of thing, but you're trying to see from a network perspective what's going on, and then maybe even a routing perspective, where are they being routed to and where is the breakdown. And then you have connectivity issues like how fast is the speed, are they actually up or down, is the Wi-Fi having a problem, those kinds of concepts. And then again, that routing within the organization if necessary. Microsoft always recommends that you have the user go directly to Microsoft 365, nothing in between. And so there are ways to do that, but in some organizations you use VPNs or something along those lines, and you're directing somebody inside the network first, corporate network, and so routing adds to issues. And then just per service details, understanding which parts of Microsoft are and are not working, so you can figure out, well, email's still fine, continue to use email, but you can't use Teams right now. And at least you do that, you sound like you're informed and you're on top of it. And then there's a couple of technologies that Rob and I are going to dive into here. You have synthetic transactions. Synthetic transactions is basically putting a bot, a little application that on different machines that sort of represent all those different factors that I listed up above. So if it was endpoints, you in essence have to have a bot on some kind of system that represents a bunch of users in a location, for the sake of argument, or on a particular connection, Wi-Fi or a wired network, whatever the case is. And that way you have someone simulating with synthetic transactions, hitting Microsoft back and forth, doing things like, let me log in, let me go ahead and send an email, let me schedule a calendar, let me try and establish a Teams call, let me try and chat inside Teams, and things like that. Actually, it's trying to synthesize what users would do when they interact with Office 365 and measure the response. Then you've got real user monitoring. In this case, you're actually watching what an individual user is doing. Some examples are sometimes it's an agent on the endpoint itself, like so the user's own laptop at home, things like that, measuring their connectivity. That's one way to do it. There's a number of other ways, but the idea is you're really trying to see what that particular user is having, and the combination of just those two is really powerful, because synthetic transactions typically isn't representative of an individual's experience, but a representation of a group of individuals, which might be one, but it's a representation of what's happening, as long as everybody is using the exact same pathway, connectivity method, you know, all that kind of stuff. It represents them, whereas user monitoring helps identify the individuals. And then you have network path visualization, where now you're starting to see what's going on with that routing. Instead of trying to test out synthetic transactions all, you know, at every step. Let's say you've got, I'm making this up, you've got 10 hairpin turns within your network that things have to route through before they finally go to Microsoft. I'm making this up as we go along, just go with it. And if you just use synthetic transactions, you'd have to have agents and have bots at every one of those hairpin turns to kind of go, where's the breakdown? It's not entirely efficient. Network path visualization helps with some of that as well. I mean, Rob, I've given these kind of high level descriptions of each technology. I know you've got a couple of slides. I'd love for you to dig into each one a little bit, maybe show a couple of practical examples of how each one's used and how they kind of work together to provide an overall set of end-to-end visibility to generate an XLA. Could you do that, please?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll walk through the three items that you've called out here: synthetic transactions, real user monitoring, and the network path piece. And then I'll jump into a little demo that kind of shows them in action. But I think you teed it up nicely with, you know, in order to get to all these things, we're talking about this XLA, right? You might be thinking, wow, okay, it sounds great, but you know, how could I possibly provide this XLA without, you know, the right tools or the right data? And that's true, right? You need the building blocks of the data in order to be able to get to this XLA, which we'll focus on these three items for now. So if we first look at from a synthetic transaction monitoring perspective, you know, specifically focus on Microsoft 365. Nick, you just kind of said it, right? This is a robot that represents the perspective from a user or a group of individual users' perspective in terms of how well are actual user interactions with Microsoft 365 working, right? This isn't just a, hey, Microsoft office.online.com is available, so we think we're good. No, it's actually going to perform mail delivery. It's going to try and book meetings. It's going to hold Teams audio and video calls. It's going to download something from OneDrive and SharePoint, really mimicking exactly what your users do to give you the details you need. I think everyone may have seen the sort of types of messages you get in the admin portal when there are global or regional problems with Microsoft, or even application-specific problems. There's a lot of wishy-washy language in there on, you know, some users may be impacted with Exchange workloads in some regions, and you know that makes it very difficult to understand. Well, should I proactively go ahead and notify my users that there might be a problem? Then maybe they don't have a problem. Maybe it doesn't affect their region. Maybe it's a very specific problem with Exchange that doesn't impact my users. So having not only the proactive view of these robots emulating your users and notifying you before a real user notices and complains to you, you also have the context on where is this problem happening. In this little tiny screenshot on my screen, you can see, you know, we've got robots deployed around the world, so we can understand how do the different regions perform with these user actions. And we get ahead of this, of knowing about these before your users notice, and we know exactly what's impacted. So that's kind of always the first part that we think is the best place to start. Get a proactive view of your environment so you can get ahead of users complaining. Now, that doesn't mean the real user monitoring aspect, right? Really understanding what are my specific actual users experiencing isn't important. And the nice thing with the solution that we've provided with Martello, you know, Nick mentioned a little bit about often this involves an agent on the endpoint. when we get into thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of users in an organization, this becomes a bit of a deployment headache, trying to decide, does this go on all my users' endpoints, strategically only on some where we think there might be problems. But we've got an agentless approach to real user monitoring. Microsoft publishes call quality data based on Teams experiences. We can pull all that data in, and when it's combined with synthetics, you get a nice view of, the synthetics give you the alert before, oh, there might be a problem in Paris with this workload. And the real user monitoring data is going to give you actual information that tells you, well, there are actually people in Paris having poor Teams experiences now, or nope, everything seems to be okay. So, it helps you understand, how to triage those issues. And despite not being able to not having to put an agent on the endpoint, we're still able to get pretty detailed information. We know what ISP you're going through. We know what headset you're using. We know what calls you're making. What are the quality of those calls? Where are you making those calls from? Are you on wired? Are you on Wi-Fi? So there's a lot of data that we can gather even in an agentless approach. And then the third piece I wanted to mention before I jump into the demo here is the network path. So, and we could think of this as synthetic monitoring, but at the network level. So we talked a little bit about the active Microsoft 365 user monitoring, where we're sending messages and having Teams calls and emulating how a user interacts with the application. So it's great to understand, okay, yep, we've confirmed there are problems with Teams video calls with these users in this location. But then the next step is, okay, but why and where is the problem? And this comes back to what we were talking earlier in the presentation about is, is it the user? Is it the internet service provider? Is it Microsoft, the provider of the service here? Is there VPN considerations or SASE considerations that we should look at as well? And so we map out the path between the user and the Teams data center, and we can easily see hop by hop where are those problems happening, right? Where is packet loss being introduced? Where is jitter being introduced? And now I have the information to quickly rule out, okay, it's not a Microsoft problem. My ISP seems okay. It's definitely a user problem. So then I might want to go and look at some of the real user monitoring data to see, is there a pattern there? Is it, just one particular user? So with that, I'm going to switch over and just show a bit of this in action. I'm going to switch my screen. And so I've got a top level view here, and these are representing various digital experiences that I wish to monitor. And I'm going to use Canada as an example here, where I've got a number of users working at a Canadian offices or homes. And I get, at this top level, I get a top level state perspective, right? How is this group of users or individuals performing? And then I can see within that, if there are problems, in this case, I do see there are problems with some of my Canadian users. Are they end user facing at the moment? Are they just application components that might eventually become end user facing problems? Or is there something going on with my infrastructure? And we talked earlier about VPN and other things that might be influencing this. So if I drill in, let's take another look at another layer down here and look at the details behind these buckets of end user, application, and infrastructure. So first and foremost, let's go into application first. I mentioned the synthetic transaction monitoring, and that's what I'm getting here with these Van Gizmo. These are my Gizmo robots, those synthetic transaction monitoring pieces that are emulating users. And I can see that they're reporting some problems. I'm also able to correlate this with what Microsoft is publishing from their portal. So these are all the applications that Microsoft publishes health for. So I can see I am getting some, I've got a red alert on Exchange, and I've got a few Gizmo robots that are reporting some errors. I have all the details of all the alerts here describing to me what's actually going on, what aspects aren't able to be functioning. Where I see here, I've got some email and calendar access problems. I can then jump back up and look at the infrastructure. I see that it's green, but just to complete the picture, on the infrastructure side, I've got visibility into how well are my ISPs performing for my users in Canada. So I've got a couple of ISPs in Canada here that are modeled. I have my Cisco infrastructure. So if I drill into my Cisco pieces, I can see how well that's being managed. right down to, you know, is it a VPN issue? What's the system health of these integrated routers, that sort of thing. We drill back up again. We mentioned the VPN scenarios. I've got some FortiGate devices here being managed. So all of this kind of gives me the perspective of, you know, where is the problem as I'm navigating through this data. And then I glossed over the end user piece, but I can actually see here I've got some users in our Canadian offices, and they're not having any issues. So this helps me understand, you know, how quickly should I be triaging this issue based on what's happening. And I can even get into just to highlight some of the information that I have here. There's lots I can show, but we only have so much time to show you so much here. But I can get some detailed about, for my experiences, where am I making calls? What devices am I using? I can drill into very specific uses of my device and which network I'm on. Where am I making those calls? What is my IP address? What device am I on? What headset am I using? A complete log of the calls that I'm making, both you know, well-performing calls and poor-performing calls based on MOS score. So there's quite a bit of detail I can get here and understand that if, you know, if I were complaining to IT, they would have this view where they might be able to see that, you know, one of my configurations, a configuration being a pairing of a device and a network, might be the problem. So they might be able to tell me, well, Rob, when you have your MacBook in the office, everything is fine. But when you take your MacBook home and you have a Teams call, that seems to be where the bulk of your problems are. So it's something with the, you know, the network at home, or maybe you're using a different headset at home. A lot of information to be able to troubleshoot what's going on. To tie it all back together, all of this data, and again, even though the demo I'm showing you now isn't necessarily calling out XLA language yet, it is providing the building blocks for an end-to-end SLA. This SLA here is capturing not just what Microsoft publishes, but also the pieces that I just showed you, right? The VPN health, the network devices that might be in the office where I am at the moment, that might be impacting my ability to get to the internet and to the Teams data center. I have visibility into the ISP, and I have visibility in terms of what Microsoft is publishing from the tenant perspective. So I got a nice end-to-end view, and all of those pieces roll into this SLA, where I can then report on a real true end-to-end, what is the user experiencing? And then the last thing I'll just call out here is on the bottom here, you know, we don't just say if the SLA was poor, you know, better luck next time. There's also information here that helps you understand, you know, why this might be a problem, right? Like you saw as I was browsing through the application pieces that we saw Exchange Online problems, some Gizmo robots were reporting some problems. We've got some Cisco infrastructure that was reporting some problems. So when I get to the end of March and I'm looking forward to April and aiming to deliver a better experience to my users so they can be more productive, I have a list here of things to focus on. I know that I've got to focus on maybe some things in my Cisco infrastructure that need some tuning or tweaking that will make sure that I'm delivering a more reliable service in the future. So I'm going to jump back to the slides. And I have one piece here that I'm just going to let build as I go through. You know, I touched on a few of these pieces, but you know, the value in this SLA and a real complete digital experience monitoring solution for Microsoft 365 involves a lot of different pieces in order for it to be really compelling. You know, we talked a lot about already the active Microsoft 365 monitoring. This is our synthetic view, getting that proactive stance on issues before users notice. Hybrid monitoring, we still see a lot of large enterprises that have Exchange and AD on-prem workloads. So having visibility into those pieces is still really critical as organizations make that shift into full cloud. We talked a bit about real user monitoring, right? The context of, okay, we know that there's some potential problems reported by synthetics, but are real users actually having problems? And if they are, what sort of information do we have about them, like I just quickly showed in the demo? We can get into UC performance analytics in terms of understanding how well detailed metrics on that aspect. I touched a little bit on, I didn't get into this in the demo, but I did touch on it in the slide with active network path monitoring. What's the route between the user and the cloud? Very important piece to understand. Is it Microsoft? Is it the ISP? Is it the user at a very high level? You know, driving into root cause analysis. I showed you the demo there where we were combining all those pieces of data. I have a complete picture now of the end-to-end delivery of a particular service or application. with all the pieces in between so that I can very quickly get to root cause. It's the ISP. Okay, I know very quickly what to do as my next step. And then last, as I showed in the demo, that all rolls up into an SLA. And again, you're going to see maturity there as more and more organizations get comfortable with, an SLA language, turning into XLA language and providing more capabilities in terms of how users can get their arms around that. Just a quick slide on Martello. We are a gold partner. We sell together with Microsoft into many large accounts. So, Microsoft trusts our solution, brings us in. Lots of market recognition from Gartner, recent award from TechGenics, just to kind of bolster the customer loyalty in terms of our customers love our solutions, and the partners that we work with, love it as well, because it solves a lot of problems that Microsoft, for example, would get a lot of the blame, right? Like I mentioned earlier, the first thing that people blame is the logo on the service that they're using. People are very quick to blame Microsoft. Most of the time, it's not Microsoft, right? It's a service provider. It's something along the path between the user and Microsoft. So it's a great story for Microsoft as well. So just to wrap up on the slideware here, Martello does have a work from anywhere solution. You can sign up for a trial. We also have a beta program currently running for some of our new initiatives. So real user monitoring, for example, is in a trial form right now, as is the active network path monitoring. So these links here on the screen will take you to a forum where you can sign up. We'd love to have the opportunity to work with you, understand, what sort of pain points do you see? How can we help with your troubleshooting and getting your users to be more productive with Microsoft 365? So sign up and we can get you onboarded with some of these new initiatives and hopefully help your teams deliver a better experience to your users. And with that, we're in Q&A.
Good stuff, Rob. Appreciate the impact. It's interesting, of your demo, the most impactful thing I think I saw was just all that contextual detail. Like even your example of, well, Rob, it's not you when you use your laptop from home, but it's you. I think you said not when you're in the office, when you're at home. That kind of thing. That context is just so powerful, especially for those of you when you're trying to troubleshoot a problem and really trying to solve it for somebody. It's so easy to go, it's Microsoft, and we both know, or we all know, it's not Microsoft all the time. It can be something completely different. Users tend to cause their own problems, but that's why we have a job. So if you do have questions, stick those in the Q&A box. I do have one question here from Charles. Rob, Charles is basically asking, he said, is this one product, more than one product? How many are we talking about?
Great question. So there are a number of product capabilities as a part of Martello's DEM solution. So it is a collection of capabilities that's delivered as one solution. So we have a number of different flavors of that solution depending on the level of functionality that you're looking for, and we'd be happy to kind of discuss that with you, walk you through, and show you what sort of capabilities we offer in those additions.
All right, so Vishal has a question about, I'm sort of paraphrasing. We covered the three technologies back on the slide when I covered synthetic transactions, real user monitoring, and what was the third one? Was it network path visualization, or was it something else? I can't remember what the third one was. Yeah, he's saying, budgets always come into play. How, if we have to pick one, which one should we pick? So what would you say to that if it was, putting aside maybe how Martello has everything packaged, but if we had to pick one of those types of technology, Vishal wants to know which one should he or she pick. Sorry, Vishal.
That's a fantastic question, one that we hear from our customers often. As I mentioned, a lot of customers are just starting their journey around digital experience monitoring, let alone getting to these XLAs. And without a doubt, I believe that's the synthetic transaction monitoring, right? Getting ahead of the problem before the user reports it is really key. Things like real user monitoring data is really, really powerful, but you don't know about the problem until the problem has actually happened. So the user is likely already created a ticket, they're already unhappy, they've already become unproductive. With synthetics, you have a chance of getting ahead of that before time. You're going to get alerted Monday at 6 in the morning, whether you like it or not, that there's potential problems in a particular location with a particular application. You have a chance of fixing that problem, or at least being proactive about it, even if all you can do is notify your users before they come into the office or before they start their day, and then flood you with complaints and support tickets.
Yep, I'd add to that. while there's a tremendous amount of context provided with just synthetic transactions, because they are doing so many different types of activities that represent what the users do, I agree with Rob. The other two types are adding, I think, more context around a proactively notified or proactive notification of a problem. There's an issue accessing Teams.
Yeah.
Great. And you'll know that users are having a problem, or synthetic users are having a problem, and potentially real users as well, depending on what's going on there, and if it's early enough or in the day or not, kind of a thing, as Rob was kind of alluding to earlier. But the other ones are trying to tell you things like how well are the services running, like the example of showing you the Cisco routers and the Cisco infrastructure. Is that working properly or not? That's just providing you context to try and go, where is the problem coming from, so I can fix it if it is something internal, or to identify that it's not something internal. So I would tend to agree that synthetic transactions is probably the way to go first. I don't see any other questions coming in. If any of you are typing a question right now, go ahead and continue typing it in. Even if we're going to end here right on time, I thought we're actually going to go over today. We sort of met our time limit of about 40 minutes or so, and we certainly want to respect your time. So if you're writing a question, put it in there. Someone from Martello will reach out to you directly and make sure you get your question answered. So don't stop typing, even though we're going to go ahead and close up shop here. Rob, thanks for a great conversation. This was really good today, I think. Covered a lot of ground.
I agree. This was great. Hopefully everyone else got some value or tidbits out of this. And thanks a lot, Nick, for your contributions here. It was a great amount of content.
Always a pleasure. Those in the audience, thanks for your attendance today. This will end today's webcast, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.
Thanks, everyone.